Hello, I am Elizabeth Hoover de Galvez, a librarian here at the Des Moines Public Library, and my pronouns are she and her. And I want to welcome you today for another episode of Spark Stories, which is a monthly program where we find out about the spark that inspired area leaders to step up and enact change to make Des Moines a better place to live. Joining us today is Max Mowitz. Max is a program director at One Iowa, Iowa's statewide LGBTQ advocacy organization. He has been active in LGBTQ advocacy work since coming out in high school, focusing on comprehensive LGBTQ education to the broader community as a component of queer liberation. Max is passionate about justice and the liberation of all marginalized people. Thank you so much for being with us today, Max.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Hi, my name is Max. My pronouns are they and he.
So I have some questions for you. If you can tell us to start about the work that you do in the community.
Yeah. So I get to do so much cool, fun work in the Des Moines area. I feel really, really grateful. So I am the program director at One Iowa. We're the statewide LGBTQ advocacy organization. I focus on a few main areas in my work. So I focus on our larger programming pieces like our Health and Wellness Conference, our Leadership Institute, and other things like that. One of my favorite parts of my job is I get to train people. So I facilitate trainings throughout Iowa and Des Moines. And those trainings are about LGBTQ people and our needs and our issues. And then, of course, I do a lot of direct service work with LGBTQ people or parents of LGBTQ people that are looking for resources and referrals. Outside of my work at One Iowa, I'm an LGBTQ doula, which means that I help LGBTQ people, specifically trans and non-binary people, in their experience of transitioning. And I am also really lucky to be part of the Iowa Trans Mutual Aid Fund, which is another organization that focuses on meeting the needs of LGBTQ individuals.
Wow, you have so much that you are working on. So it's really impressive. And I'm so glad you were able to take the time to join us today. Can you tell us more about how you got into this work? So a specific experience, for example, what we call on this series, your spark story, for what inspired you to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny because I have worked in the area of like social justice for a long time. I've actually always valued it. When I was in high school, I helped put on like concerts and stuff like that to raise money for different organizations and things like that. So it's always like service has always been a value to me. But I would say that my spark story actually really comes from my experience with some LGBTQ organizations when I was a kid. So when I was in high school, I came out around the age of 17, and I started working with One Iowa, which is where I work now, which is full circle, and an organization by the name of Iowa Pride Network, which no longer exists, but at the time was really, really a big organization, but also like a big motivator for me in the work that I did. So I got to work with these two organizations. And I remember very, very strongly the first few months after I came out, I joined their leadership boards. I dove in, I was canvassing for the LGBTQ community. I was, like I said, knocking doors, engaging in all this work, learning how to public speak, learning how to do community education. And it was wild because when I first came out, I was so depressed and I was so sad. And coming out was really hard for me when I came out to myself. It really, really shook my world because I had a lot of internalized homophobia and transphobia. And when I came out, I should be clear, I came out as a lesbian first. I didn't come out as a trans person until many years later. But, as I got more involved in this work with One Iowa, with Iowa Pride Network and beyond, it all changed. Like, I just remember being so excited to like wake up every single morning. And I was like, okay, all right, this is interesting. And I just kept doing it. And I was like, this is the work I need to be doing, because I just like, I felt like I had a purpose, and nothing in my life made me feel like that. And so for me, though I have always been like dedicated to service to others, like, it is the LGBTQ work, it is the creating a better space for the people like me in the world that really like lights my fire and wakes me up every day. And I know that anytime I move away from that, I notice I don't have as much energy. I'm not as excited, so I know that I'm living with purpose because I feel that feeling. So those first initial months in doing like LGBTQ advocacy work were really like the spark that got me to where I am today and the work that I do today.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And you kind of touched on what your vision is a little bit about creating a space for the LGBTQ community.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk more about your vision for what you want to accomplish here in Iowa?
Yeah. I work with many different organizations, even outside of the LGBTQ community. And I think that my goal in whatever work that I'm doing is to make myself obsolete, right? Because I don't want to focus on, having enough money. I want to focus on the issues not like being resolved, right? So I'm always really, really focused on LGBTQ liberation, which is not just rights. It's not just access, but it's the ability to live fully as an LGBTQ person and have all of the, the amazing lives that we're supposed to have as LGBTQ people in that kind of liberatory space. So my goal, again, is to make it so that none of the work I do needs to happen anymore, right? I want to make it so that LGBTQ people don't need to, find a healthcare provider that's LGBTQ friendly, because they all are, right? I want to make it so that LGBTQ people like know how to self-advocate and are feeling empowered in their identities. So when they are in those medical spaces, they can advocate for themselves. I want LGBTQ leaders to feel affirmed and empowered already and feel like they can go out into their communities and make change regardless of their identities. So I don't want LGBTQ people to go like become necessarily like, I don't want us to like lose what makes us beautiful and unique and amazing. I just want all the barriers that we experience to go away. So that's kind of a lofty goal, right? That's the end goal. That's the thing that I always keep my eye on, and I always try to make sure I'm lining myself up with that. But the goal that I would have in the state of Iowa is to have more LGBTQ affirming healthcare providers, to have more spaces for LGBTQ people. To access care, to lead in their communities, and to work and play. And then also to make sure that every trans and non-binary person specifically has the means that they need to access gender affirming care.
Great. And I think, for someone who's maybe not involved or doesn't have personal experience, I think that, it's hard to understand how many barriers LGBTQ people face in Iowa in particular, just some of the things that need to be fought for. And so it's a big and a tall order, I know, to accomplish this vision. So can you talk about any books that have helped you keep going or been really influential in helping you create the vision or helping you, continue with your spark?
Yeah. So I've talked a lot about like my view on LGBTQ liberation today, but I'm engaged in work outside of that, right? So showing up for all the ways that LGBTQ identities intersect with other identities. So I believe in class liberation. I believe in racial liberation, liberation for individuals with disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So one book that has been kind of a little bit more like a North Star for me. I'm going to say this and then have like 3 other books, but my favorite book of all time is Stone Butch Blues. And Stone Butch Blues is a like a really important piece of literature in the LGBTQ community, because it talks about the violence experienced by trans and non-binary people in like the 80s and 70s and like early 90s. But what I love about it is that it's one person's encounter or interaction with their own gender identity, their own experiences of violence and discrimination, love and loss. So it's just like a beautiful book from that perspective, but it also ties in some like class struggle and talks about the importance of like class solidarity with LGBTQ people. And I love that. So it's my favorite book for that reason, not just because of that, but also because it's beautifully written and it resonates a lot with the way I experience my own gender. But another book that I really love that actually like taught me how to understand trans misogyny specifically and the experience of being trans is called Whipping Girl by Julia Serrano. And that book really does a good job. It's a series of essays really about the experience of being like a trans woman, which I'm not a trans woman, but it allowed me to understand that perspective and also understand the ways that trans people are targeted by all these different systems to be perceived as less than. And so that was like the book that when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, everything is connecting for me. I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to be able to connect with these larger systems, whereas Stone Butch Blues is how I connected with my own experience and how that experience connects with the other like liberation work that I try to focus on and engage with.
Great. Thank you so much for those two wonderful recommendations for us to read and start learning more. Is there anything else that you want to share?
Yeah, I always want to mention, one of the things that we mention at One Iowa when we do community education is it's great. Like keep doing trainings, read articles, things like that, but read books by LGBTQ authors, like read LGBTQ stories. So it doesn't have to just be, a book about oppression, like a nonfiction book. Those are my favorite. I love nonfiction, but like read fictional works by LGBTQ authors, like get more into LGBTQ stories, because as you do that, like you start to understand and learn the many different ways that you can be LGBTQ, the beautiful diversity and like vastness that is the community. One of my favorite fiction books is Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. It's just like a beautifully written book, and a book that if I didn't read it, I wouldn't have like learned all the things that I learned about what it can mean to be two-spirit, for example. So just read more books by LGBTQ people. It's gonna be more helpful than any PowerPoint you'll ever watch or any Instagram caption you'll ever read. Reading stories by LGBTQ people is really, really powerful.
Great. Thank you. And the library does do a lot of, for example, bookmarks, recommendations from our librarians for different books in own voices that you can find here in our library. So be sure to watch for those. Check out our community page so that you can find or get help finding those. And of course, you can reach out to a librarian too and just ask for recommendations on a specific topic or a category of books. So Max, thank you so much again for being with us today and sharing your story. And if you would like to learn more about Spark Stories, you can check out the Des Moines Public Library's website, and be sure to tune in next month for another episode of Spark Stories. Thank you.